Erica Kaufman, I don't know how much Corman you knew before you joined this community, Modpo community, but now you know Corman. How has this poem lasted for you? And a sub question would be, do you think it's a teachable poem? Erica, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I
Okay.
was just looking at the poem again.
Yeah.
Well, that's a hard question. I do think that it's a teachable poem. Corman is not, it isn't, he's not somebody that I've spent all that much time with. I didn't know him before Modpo.
Right.
And, I like him, but he's just not somebody I've spent much time really thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
This is a poem where I could imagine it being teachable, but I think context would matter a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like why teach a poem like this? What is it doing in the context of what one is teaching? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Davey, why, if you were, and you'll never be told what to teach, I hope you'll never have a job as a professor where they tell you what to teach, but if you were told, listen, Davey, teach all this other stuff, but make sure you teach this poem, why would it be useful in a poetry course, for instance?
It might be useful for some of the reasons why folks are so excited about it in Modpo, which is to think about the sometimes stressful and often solitary reading practice of poetry as a communal experience and as an experience that means something to the poet. I think that that's something that matters to so many folks who teach poetry, is to think that they're teaching work they love, they're teaching the colleagues of their mentor, they're teaching their friends poetry, that there aren't that many of us and we're not that far apart.
Right.
And to think about it as participating in a collective practice with a lot of people in it. That's something so exciting about Modpo is you're reading a Divya Victor poem and there's Divya Victor. You're reading a Jason Zezka poem and there's Jason Zezka. And that we're thinking about the fact that you could bring a person into the room with you by means of reading a poem.
Which is magical,
which is super magical.
Not realistic.
And I think that that's something that's hard about teaching poetry to folks who are not excited about it is why would I do all this work when I could just read a sentence? And the reason that you would do that work is to be able to luxuriate in hanging out in the poem. And that's something that we try to teaching experimental poetry in so many ways of what if you just stayed here in this small set of words?
Yes.
And this poem, this Sid Corman poem is all about that and illustrates it really beautifully.
I'm going to pose this as a question and go around and get lots of different responses to this. So in Modpo, most of the poems are metapoetic in one way or other. This is very explicitly so. Dickinson's poems are very explicitly so. Most of the Niederker poems that we've chosen are explicitly metapoetic. This is sort of double metapoetic or meta-metapoetic in the sense that it isn't simply referring to itself as a poem. It's referring to the necessity of the reader's presence, of there being a reader. It presupposes that the poem can't exist without a reader, right? So what I'd like to do, and I think that's important, because a lot of the blame, the criticism of modern and contemporary experimental poetry that, regular folks, whatever that means, put on it is, why the hell would you work so hard to get meaning out of something? Why does poetry have to be about itself? Why can't it be about the way we live our lives? Why does it have to be so inward? Why does it have to be so insular? Why does it have to be so academic? It doesn't have any heart. On the contrary, Modpo is out to prove that metapoetic, self-conscious poems about poetry have deep hearts. And this poem has a heart because it's trying to imagine with some desperation that there needs to be a reader in order for it to exist.
I'm still stuck on the Corman. I'm still kind of thinking about the question that you asked before, and I'm wondering if it might be interesting to think about it isn't for want as a way to kind of teach essay writing.
Interesting. Why do you think that?
Because I think that it mandates a certain close reading and a certain engagement from a reader, but there's also an openness behind how he's saying what he's saying that you can only accomplish through poetry, that the act of writing prose about a poem like this might help prose become better.
So let me improvise what the prompt would be to these student essay writers. It would be this. Here we have a poem in which the poet is saying that it's not that he does have something to say, but he's not interested in it. That he does have something he thinks you should know, but he's not interested in that. He's only interested in writing something that will keep you reading. Write an essay in which that's the case. That the essay is not about anything except for how it's not about anything except that we want readers.
Yes.
That would be cool. I like it. I should be a
I
teacher,
like
I think.
it.